Hi, my name is Kirsten. Welcome to our lesson on climate change and societies. First, let's introduce shortly the issues as to how climate change can and will influence our daily life as individuals, and most certainly the well-being and livelihood of societies. While the current climate change context is due to the actions of humankind, in other words, we are the cause, we will also be, alongside ecosystems and biodiversity, victims of it. Yes, we do speak a lot about mitigation and adaptation. And it is also true that humankind throughout the ages has proven to be extremely resilient and adaptable to circumstances. But that doesn't mean that the effects of climate change will be a breeze for us. Millions upon millions throughout the planet will be severely affected. We live and are a part of natural systems. The impact climate change will bring will, in a word, denormalize a range of conditions to which societies are currently used to. How can our current livelihoods be denormalized? Let's just look upon some of the most basic systems that sustain our societies. Health, for instance. Think of the ever more recurring heat waves due to changing climate and the death toll that comes with it. Think also in infrastructure and on how extreme weather events might damage or destroy roads and bridges. You can also take into account our current energetic and transportation systems and how dependent they are on fossil fuels. We need to decrease our emissions. Therefore, we need to shift to other energy sources, which is costly and takes time. But the more time it takes us to accomplish the shift, the more we add up to the climate change impacts, because we keep on contributing to greenhouse gases production. Food is another system that will be severely affected. And, well, needless to say, we need to eat. Productivity will be affected. Without a doubt, prices will rise. And access to food will be a huge challenge, especially so in developing countries. Finally, also take into account water. Climate change will affect the hydrological dynamics of the planet, the water flow, the water volumes. I come from South Africa and water scarcity is already a reality there, as well as in several other countries of the world. As an end note to this concept, bear in mind that all potential incoming impacts will differently affect societies and individuals depending on the country you live in, on its degree of development, on gender, race, and age. Just like our societies are not equal, the impacts of climate change will also be unequal on how they affect people all over. But these effects will be strongly related to the social fabric in each case. Now let's get a bit deeper in each of the social systems we just mentioned. The first one, health. Human health is related to many important factors like safe drinking water, clean air, sufficient food, a secure shelter, and general safety. Climate change will have a toll on all of these. According to the World Health Organization, human casualties due to health issues related to climate change will increase by 250 million by 2030 and 2050. Now let's get some basics first. Clean air. Climate change will increase both ground level ozone and particulate matter air pollution in some areas. The outcome of this, from various respiratory illnesses to cancer. Currently, 15% of lung cancers in the world are the result of the increase of particulate matter air pollution. The other basic issue, access to safe and clean water. Climate change will bring about more water downpours, water scarcity, and the warming of water. These conditions are heavily from the spread of germs, diseases, and high pollutant particles. The outcome, we will be able to expect the increase of diarrheal diseases, poisoning, cholera, intestinal parasitic worms, and a big etc. And with an increase on illness and disease, the situation is also dire on what the cost to cope up will be. According to the World Health Organization, direct damage costs to the health are estimated to be in the order of 2 to 4 billion American dollars every year by 2030. We will go further on the interrelation between health and climate change in our next lesson on health. As to the second aspect that societies rely on, infrastructure. Cities, roads, bridges, ports, buildings, and so on, will be facing the impacts of extreme weather events such as flooding, wildfires, rising sea levels, and more. But it won't only relate to the occurrence and how infrastructure will be affected, but also to the cost of keeping it up and recovering. Over and over and over again. For how long we will be able to rebuild a collapsed bridge that is critical for the livelihood of two towns? Or how many times will we have to rebuild a city destroyed by a hurricane or flooded by a tsunami or heavy rains? Flooding specifically is already a huge issue in lots of countries, such as Bangladesh or other Pacific islands. And needless to say, as the human population keeps on increasing in numbers, that results in an increased need for more infrastructure, including urbanization. This in turn increases land use and land usage, which typically manifests in the form of deforestation and disruption of natural habits. And this trend brings us to keeping on contributing to ecosystem decline and biodiversity loss, among others. As to the concept of transportation, climate change will also affect the transportation system and infrastructure, thus increasing the cost of maintenance of such system in every country. On the 2016 to 2017 storm season, California suffered massive flooding, coastal erosion, and landslide erosion, all of which resulted in a big economical loss and affecting connectivity. Thus, the damage to infrastructure will have a direct influence on the way we travel and transport. Roads and highways were built and designed for relatively stable temperatures and natural events, but climate change is changing the situation. Nevertheless, let's not only think on transportation in terms of physical damage to roads, vehicles, and the like. The transportation system in itself is something we should look at. The average petrol car on the road in the United Kingdom produces the equivalent of 180 grams of CO2 every kilometer, while a diesel car produces 173 grams of CO2 per kilometer. The larger the car, the higher the emissions. For example, in the United States, the average passenger vehicle on the road releases 650 grams of CO2 per kilometer. In Europe, the average emission of a new petrol car was 123 grams of CO2 per kilometer in 2018. The increasingly significant development of the production of vehicles that are considered to be less polluting and the increasingly stringent standards concerning vehicles with combustion engines as well as those using diesel influence the consumption and transport modes of users. Thus, we could say we are already beginning to adapt to decrease our impact on the temperature rise. However, although these solutions are considered green, they still have an impact on the environment and on climate change. In other words, we still need to do better, way better. Electric cars are currently the main solution to a greener transport system. Although electric cars produce less CO2 than combustion cars, their production and assembly still require a polluting process. Moreover, the production of electricity, their energy source, is not yet clean. In fact, we are moving from one form of pollution to another. So we have to find alternatives to the current polluting modes of transport. For example, by using bicycles or walking whenever possible, or by using public transport system to decrease our footprint. As to energy, well, we use a lot, but also it depends a lot of where we live. In 2019, for instance, the average Hungarian was using over 28,000 kilowatts an hour every year, while the average American was using nearly 80,000 kilowatts an hour annually, which is 8 times higher than what the average Afghan citizens use. To produce secondary energy, such as electricity, societies need primary energy. Currently, electricity mainly comes from non-renewable sources. According to the EIA, due to a growing worldwide population, our energy consumption is not ready to fall down and will in turn increase year by year until at least 2050. And in this line, globally consumption of oil and natural gas will increase, while coal consumption should start falling down by around 2030. In order to produce clean secondary energy, We need to keep on working on expanding the use of renewable sources, while at the same time researching on how to make them cleaner. We will dig deeper on this topic on the lesson on energy. As to food, with a constant growing population, which will be close to 10 billion by 2050, the need of food will therefore increase. Our current food system, production, distribution, and consumption is a major threat to the environment and our lives. The majority of agricultural emissions are related to raising livestock, rice cultivation, and production of synthetic fertilizers. Seeing agriculture as just another industry led to the use of pesticides and chemicals, destruction of primary forests in the Amazon and Asian rainforests, which have accelerated the climate change process. By destroying forests to take more land, farmers and food companies have a negative effect because these lands are highly subject to runoff and loss of soil quality. The world is losing vitally important ecosystems that remove the greenhouse gases from the atmosphere. The negative effects of our food system related to the climate change are already a fact, and since food security is not yet a given anywhere on earth, with 690 million worldwide currently undernourished according to FAO, climate change will keep on making the situation worse. Climate fluctuations are affecting both southern and northern countries, heat waves and droughts. Food security is more than ever endangered. As to water, better management of this resource will be essential. According to WWF, currently 1.1 billion people worldwide lack access to water and 2.7 billion people find water scarce for at least 1 month a year. But by 2025, 2/3 of the world's population may face water shortages. All of these societal systems and how they interrelate to what climate change is bringing lead us to the concept of vulnerability. Think about how differently climate change will affect developed countries versus developing countries, rich versus poor, women versus men. Indeed, everybody will be affected one way or another within a globalized world, but not to the same degree. Thus, vulnerability applies differently. This is where the concept of climate justice enters. Climate justice is strongly linked to the principle of equity and is a real need. The Paris Agreement mentions the idea of climate justice, but it seems really difficult to fight it since the gap between the rich and the poor is huge. For instance, according to the Paris Reality Check, Mozambique accounts for 0.09% of the world's total emissions, but the vulnerability of the local population is higher than the vulnerability of the northern countries' populations. We will discuss in depth the concept of vulnerability and climate justice in our lesson on climate justice. So what is being done at a social level? So many things of which you could also be a part of. Take, for example, the climate youth movement. All over the world, young people have recognized the devastating effects of how global economy is built upon and how different societies are more vulnerable than others due to this, as well as to how we are causing climate change and its effects upon ourselves. Therefore, they are demanding that decision makers and people in position of power address these issues to secure a livable future for us and the generations to come. So, join the movement. You can make your voice heard for a better world in regards to your opinion and vision. You can become part of the specific working group regarding climate empowerment adaptation, agriculture and food, animal rights, cities, human rights, or gender equality, among so many others. There is currently a worldwide network of other 1,000 organizations. So join, push, and together we can turn the tides.